There are times when destiny shows up as a quiet man and 15 pieces of silver. In the scorching dust of an afternoon when even the dogs wouldn't stir from the shade, Isabel Rios would discover that sometimes freedom has to be bought. The desert wind that day carried more than sand. It carried hope, even if no one knew it yet. The midday sun turned the earth into a blazing inferno, and Isabel felt every speck of dust cling to her clammy skin. Tied to the post behind the saloon since dawn, she'd stopped counting the hours. Her torn clothes spoke of nights she'd rather forget, and her eyes, once bright, seemed to have lost their luster in the shadows of this town that pretended not to see her. The saloon patrons walked past her without a glance, as if she were part of the scenery, just like the empty barrels and rusty spittoons. Some whispered amongst themselves, but their words got lost in the constant buzz of flies and the creak of the swinging doors. Belle, that's what they called her, though she'd forgotten who first shortened her name, stared at the dusty horizon. She hadn't prayed in a long time. Prayer was a luxury for those who still had faith in the world's goodness. That's when she spotted the figure. A man of medium height, his skin weathered by the sun, was approaching on foot. He didn't wear the flashy clothes of city folk, nor the finery of rich ranchers. His simple clothes and measured stride stood out from the usual hustle and bustle of Main Street. Tomas Alvarado stopped in front of the saloon owner, a pot-bellied man whose grizzled beard couldn't hide a greedy grin. They exchanged a few low words, then Tomas pulled a worn leather pouch from his jacket. The jingle of silver coins echoed in the suffocating air. 15 pieces. That was the price of her freedom, or at least a change of owner. The man didn't spare her a glance during the transaction. He didn't gawk at her, didn't examine her like merchandise. That indifference, strangely, felt less humiliating than the lecherous stares she was used to. When Tomas untied the ropes that bound her wrists, Belle felt the blood flow back painfully into her numb hands. He said nothing, made no sudden movements. He simply offered her a gourd of lukewarm water and waited for her to drink. The water tasted of metal and dust, but it was the first time in days she could drink her fill. She emptied the gourd almost entirely, water running down her chin and soaking the collar of her torn dress. "Come," he said simply, in a deep, measured voice that betrayed no emotion. He led her to 2 horses tied to a post near the church. One was a bay stallion with bulging muscles, the other a smaller mare with a sand-colored coat. Tomas helped her mount the mare, his hands resting respectfully on her shoulders, just long enough for her to find her balance. Belle hadn't ridden a horse since childhood, when her father still took her to the pastures. Her muscles protested as she settled into the saddle, but the feeling of relative freedom, after hours of forced immobility, was exhilarating. They left town at a walk, kicking up clouds of red dust that clung to their clothes. The sun was beginning its descent towards the horizon, painting the sky with coppery hues that reflected on the scattered rocks of the landscape. Tomas rode slightly ahead, never turning back to check if she was following. It was neither indifference nor scorn, Belle realized. It was respect. He gave her the space to decide at every moment if she wanted to continue or not. The hot desert wind whipped their faces, bringing with it the scent of sage and blooming cacti. In the distance, the mountains etched a jagged line against the fiery sky. Belle closed her eyes and, for the first time in months, took a deep breath. "Where are you taking me?" she finally asked, her voice raspy from thirst and silence. "My place," Tomas replied without turning around. "There's food, a bed, water to wash up?" He paused, then added, "and locks that only you can bolt from the inside." These last words hit Belle like a punch to the gut. She hadn't expected such delicacy, such unspoken understanding of what she had been through. The tears she'd held back for weeks finally welled up in her eyes, but she held them back still. Crying was dangerous. Crying meant showing weakness. Tomas's ranch appeared around a bend in the rocks, a modest adobe construction with thick walls that promised coolness. A porch ran the length of the front, supported by wooden beams, weathered by time and sandstorms. A few chickens pecked in the yard, and a floppy-eared dog raised its head at their approach before turning away indifferently. "Valiente," Tomas said, pointing to the animal. "He doesn't like strangers, but he gets used to them." Belle watched the dog, which had moved away to lie in the shade of a watering trough. She understood that wariness, that careful distance from the unknown. Tomas helped her dismount with the same delicacy he had shown in town. His hands were calloused but gentle, and he stepped back as soon as she found her footing on her trembling legs. The inside of the house was Spartan, but clean. The bare walls held only a dark wooden crucifix and the portrait of a young woman with braided black hair, smiling shyly at the camera. Belle quickly looked away from the frame, feeling she had no right to linger on that face. "The bedroom's in there," Tomas said, pointing to a closed door. "There's water in the basin, clean clothes on the bed. Take all the time you need." He headed to the kitchen, then turned back. "I've got beans and tortillas. Sound good?" Belle nodded, still in disbelief at such simple courtesy. She pushed open the bedroom door and discovered a modest but welcoming space. The bed was covered with a hand-woven blanket with colorful geometric patterns. On the dresser, a ceramic basin and a full pitcher of water awaited her, along with a faded blue cotton dress, clearly new. For the first time in months, Belle found herself alone in a place where she could close a door and be sure it would stay closed. She turned the key in the lock and the click echoed like music in her ears. She washed for a long time, scrubbing her skin until it was red, as if she could erase the traces of everything she'd endured. The water turned brown, then black, washing away weeks of grime and humiliation. The dress fit her perfectly, as if it had been sewn just for her. The fabric was soft against her skin, and she realized she had forgotten what it was like to wear clothes that didn't itch, that didn't smell of sweat and fear. When she came out of the bedroom, Tomas was sitting at the kitchen table, before 2 steaming plates. He had changed his shirt and his black hair was damp, a sign he'd washed up too. The meal passed in a silence that was neither awkward nor hostile, but simply respectful. Tomas ate slowly, never raising his eyes to her, giving her space to get used to this normality she'd thought lost forever. The beans were fragrant with cumin and garlic, the tortillas still warm. It was a simple meal, but Belle hadn't tasted anything so delicious in an eternity. When they were done, Tomas got up and cleared the plates. "I'll sleep in the living room," he said, without looking at her. "The bedroom is yours for as long as you want it." Belle opened her mouth to protest. After all, it was his house, but the words died on her lips. She understood he was trying to offer her what she needed most, the certainty that she was safe. That night, lying in the bed with sheets that smelled of lavender, Belle stared at the wooden ceiling blackened by years of smoke. Through the thin wall, she heard Tomas settle on what must have been an uncomfortable couch. He coughed once, then silence fell again, broken only by the night song of coyotes in the distance. The idea slowly sprouted in her fatigue-addled mind. She was free now. Well, in a way. Nothing obligated her to stay here. She could leave, disappear into the night, start over somewhere else where no one would know her story. Around 3 in the morning, when the moon was at its zenith, Belle slipped out of bed. She put on the dirty dress she'd worn when she arrived. The clean dress belonged to Tomas. She had no right to steal it. Barefoot, she opened the bedroom door with 1,000 precautions. Tomas was sleeping on the couch, a blanket pulled up to his shoulders, his boots neatly aligned near the front door. In the moonlight filtering through the window, his face looked younger, less etched with worries. Belle moved towards the exit, carefully avoiding the creaking floorboards. She knew those kinds of sounds from trying to escape many times before. The door opened without resistance, and the cool desert air enveloped her like a caress. She had crossed half the yard when she stopped dead. Tomas stood by the gate, leaning against the wooden post, arms crossed. He didn't seem angry or surprised, just patient, as if he'd been waiting for her. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked simply. The question hit her hard. Where could she go, indeed? She had no family left, no friends, no money. Nowhere in the world was waiting for her. Belle shook her head slowly, the tears she'd held back for hours finally flowing freely down her cheeks. Without a word, Tomas turned and went back into the house. Belle remained by the gate for a long time, her eyes fixed on the vast nocturnal desert. The stars shone with an intensity she'd forgotten, and the silence was no longer oppressive but soothing. Finally, she, too, went back inside. The next morning, she woke to the first cock's crow. A ray of sunshine filtered through the window, gently warming her cheeks. For the first time in months, she had slept a deep sleep, without nightmares. In the kitchen, Tomas was making coffee in a dented metal coffee pot. The rich, bitter smell filled her nostrils, reminding her of childhood mornings in her parents' home. "Coffee?" he offered, briefly looking up at her. She nodded and sat at the table. He poured her a chipped mug, then returned to his preparations. Bacon sizzled in a cast-iron skillet, and he flipped the slices with precise, economical movements. "I've got things to do at the stables," he said, placing a plate in front of her. "You can stay here or come along if you feel like it, whatever you want." Those last 3 words echoed in Belle's mind. Whatever you want. When was the last time she'd had a choice? After breakfast, she followed him outside. The day's heat was already rising from the red earth, but the air was still bearable. Tomas headed towards a corral where several horses grazed on sparse grass. "That one there, he's Tormenta," he said, pointing to a black stallion with bright eyes. "He's got a bad temper, but he's loyal once you earn his trust." He opened the gate and entered the corral with a bucket of oats. Most of the horses approached quietly, used to the routine. But Tormenta backed away, ears flattened, and reared slightly when Tomas advanced towards him. "He smells you," Tomas explained without turning to Belle. "He doesn't understand yet that you're not a danger." The stallion continued to fidget, pawing and snorting loudly through his nostrils. Belle backed away instinctively, tears welling in her eyes. Even the animals rejected her. Even they smelled the stain of what she'd been through on her. She turned on her heels and ran towards the house, the sobs she'd held back since yesterday finally erupting. Behind her, she heard Tomas call her name, but she didn't stop. In the bedroom, she collapsed onto the bed, face buried in the pillow that still smelled of lavender. Why had she thought she could start over? Why had she imagined that a place like this could accept her? Soft knocks sounded at the door. "Belle?" Tomas's voice was gentle, patient. "Can I come in?" Belle wiped her tears with the back of her hand and opened the door. Tomas stood in the hallway holding 2 steaming mugs. He handed her one without a word and sat on the chair near the window, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Animals smell fear," he said finally, looking out the window towards the corral. "Not shame, not the past, just the fear of the present moment." He took a sip of coffee before continuing. "Tormenta was mistreated before I got him. Beaten, starved. It took 6 months before he'd let me brush him." Belle clutched the warm mug between her hands, drawing comfort from that simple warmth. "And now?" she asked in a raspy voice. "Now, he sometimes sleeps next to my bedroll, outside under the stars. But he had to learn to tell the difference between hands that strike and hands that heal." The next few days settled into a soothing routine. Belle helped with chores, cooked meals, mended clothes. Each daily gesture was a tiny victory against the memories that still assailed her sometimes. The sound of a lock clicking still made her jump. Heavy footsteps in the yard still tied her stomach in knots. But gradually, she learned to distinguish the familiar sounds of this new home from the threats of her past. One morning, hanging laundry, she caught herself humming a melody her mother used to sing to her. Her voice was rusty, fragile, but the sound seemed beautiful to her in the desert silence. Tomas, who was mending a harness under the porch, briefly looked up at her and smiled, the first smile she'd seen from him. It was that day she noticed the small wooden fence behind the house, a carefully tended patch of earth where wildflowers grew, and a simple wooden cross marked a grave. She approached it cautiously, aware she was trespassing on intimate territory. The flowers were withered, dried out by the heat. On the cross a name was hand-carved: Elena Alvarado, 1847-1873, beloved wife. Belle picked some wildflowers she'd noticed near the well and placed them on the grave. Arranging the impromptu bouquet, her fingers brushed against something metallic in the earth. She delicately uncovered the object, a tarnished silver brooch depicting a stylized flower with delicate petals. A desert flower, that tenacious plant that blooms despite drought and sandstorms. "She wore it on our wedding day," Tomas's voice said behind her. Belle jumped, the brooch clutched in her palm. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." She used to say she put it on when she wanted to be seen, even when she thought no one was looking. He reached for the brooch, examined it for a moment, then handed it back to her. "Keep it." Elena would have liked a brave woman to wear it. In the weeks that followed, Belle wore the brooch pinned to her dress. and something within her seemed to bloom like the flower it represented. Her gait became more confident, her movements less fearful. She learned to smile again when Tomas told her anecdotes about his horses, or when Valiente, less wary now, would come for pets near her feet. One particularly hot afternoon, she returned to the corral where Tormenta grazed. The black stallion raised his head at her approach, but this time he didn't back away. He looked at her with curiosity, ears pricked, as if trying to understand this new version of herself. Belle sat in the dry grass a few feet from the fence and began to hum the melody of her childhood. Her voice carried softly in the still desert air, mingled with the buzzing of bees in the wildflowers. Slowly, very slowly, Tormenta approached. He stopped a few steps from her. Then, in a gesture that moved Belle to tears, he lay down in the grass, his long legs folded beneath him, his dark eyes fixed on her with new trust. "He's giving you a gift," Tomas said, having joined her silently. "A horse that lies down near you offers you its vulnerability." It was at that moment Belle understood that she too had learned to trust. That realization hit her with the force of a revelation. She was healing. If you enjoyed this story of transformation and courage, don't hesitate to subscribe to our channel to discover more touching tales that celebrate the resilience of the human spirit. Your support helps us continue to share these moments of humanity. But the next morning, 3 figures appeared on the horizon, kicking up a cloud of red dust. Belle, feeding the chickens, felt her blood run cold, recognizing the lead rider's build. Harlan McCrae, the brother of the man who had sold her, rode towards the ranch accompanied by 2 other men. Tomas came out of the stable, hearing the pounding of hooves. He calmly wiped his hands on a rag and waited, still as a rock, for the visitors to stop in the yard. Harlan dismounted with the arrogance of one who believes he has a right to demand. He was a corpulent man with piggish eyes, whose unkempt beard couldn't hide the cruelty of his smile. He wore a dusty town suit and an ostentatious revolver at his hip. "Tomas Alvarado, I presume," he said without preamble. "I'm Harlan McCrae. I've come to get what belongs to my family." His gaze fell on Belle, who had instinctively moved closer to the house, and his smile widened. "Well, hello there, Isabel. We've missed you." Tomas didn't budge an inch, but Belle felt the tension emanating from him like the heat from a brazier. The 2 men accompanying Harlan also dismounted. One was a churchman with an impeccable white collar despite the travel dust. Reverend Elijah Grady, no doubt. The other, younger, wore a sheriff's star pinned to his vest. Xavi Mendoza, the local deputy. "Isabel belongs to no one," Tomas said in a calm but firm voice. "She's free to make her own choices." Harlan burst into a greasy laugh that sent the chickens scattering in a flurry of wings. "Free? That girl was given as payment for a legal debt. My brother had every right." "Your brother's dead," Tomas retorted. "His debts died with him, not the ones that concern my family." Harlan spat in the dust. "That hussy belongs to the McCraes now, and I won't let some half-breed cattle rustler steal what's mine." Reverend Grady stepped forward, hands clasped in a show of false compassion. "Mr. Alvarado, we don't want any trouble, but young Isabel has obligations to the McCrae family. It would be Christian to return her to them." Xavi Mendoza remained silent, but Belle saw that he carefully avoided her gaze. She remembered him. He frequented the saloon and had never lifted a finger to help her when she was tied to the post. "Isabel can speak for herself," Tomas said, turning to her. "Do you want to leave with these men?" All eyes converged on Belle. She felt her legs tremble, but the hand that brushed Elena's brooch drew strength she didn't know she had. "No," she said in a clear voice that carried in the warm desert air. "I won't leave." Harlan took a step towards her, his face contorted with rage. "You don't have a choice, you little slut. You're going to—" "Hold it!" Tomas's voice cracked like a whip. He'd stepped between Harlan and Belle, and for the first time his hand rested on the grip of his own revolver. "You're on my land. And on my land, women are respected." A tense silence settled, broken only by the nervous whinnying of the horses and the whistling of the wind through the cacti. Harlan backed away a step, but his malicious grin didn't disappear. "All right, Alvarado, but we'll be back. You've got one day, just one, to think it over. After that, we'll return with guns and legal papers. And this time, we won't leave empty-handed." He remounted, his companions following suit. "One day," he repeated, spurring his horse. Not an hour more. The cloud of dust kicked up by the riders slowly faded in the still air, but the tension hung over the ranch like a storm refusing to break. Belle and Tomas remained silent for a long moment, each lost in thought. It was Valiente who broke the silence, approaching Belle, his wet snout against her hand. For the first time since her arrival, the dog actively sought her touch, as if sensing she needed comfort. "They'll be back," Belle said in a hushed voice. "And they won't come alone." Tomas nodded gravely. "I know. Harlan McCrae isn't a man to take no for an answer." "Then I'll leave tonight," she said, lifting her chin. "I won't bring you trouble. You've already done more than—" "No." Tomas's interruption was gentle but firm. "You won't run anymore, Belle. You chose to stay, and I chose to protect you." That night, neither of them truly slept. Belle heard Tomas pacing the living room, sometimes stopping to look out the window. For her part, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, clutching Elena's brooch to her heart like a talisman. In the early morning, timid knocks sounded at the door. Tomas opened it, hand on his weapon, but relaxed when he saw an elderly woman with gray hair, holding a basket covered with a white cloth. "Dolores Rivera," she introduced herself in a hoarse voice. I'm looking for my daughter." Belle, drawn by the voices, appeared in the doorway of her room. The woman looked up at her and let out a muffled cry. "Isabel! Mija!" Belle's legs gave out from under her. That voice, that face etched with years and suffering, but which she recognized. Her mother, whom she had believed dead for so long. "Mama." The word came out of her throat as a sob. Dolores rushed to her, held her close with desperate strength. Belle could smell sweat, road dust, and something else she couldn't quite place. "I looked everywhere," Dolores murmured in Spanish, stroking her daughter's hair. "When I heard what happened to you, I left everything to find you." Tomas watched the scene with suspicion. Something in the woman's mannerisms, her timely arrival, roused his suspicion. But seeing Belle's tears of joy, he kept his doubts to himself. "We have to go, Mija," Dolores whispered in her daughter's ear. "I've got a cabin north of El Paso. We'll be safe there, just the two of us like before." "But Tomas," Belle began. "He can't do anything for you now. Those men will be back with guns. They'll kill you if they have to." Dolores hugged her daughter tighter. "Come with me. Now." Within an hour, Belle had gathered her meager belongings. Dolores waited near two tired horses, nervously patting the saddle of one of them. She had refused to stay for lunch, claiming the urgency of leaving before Harlan returned. Tomas helped Belle fasten her bundle to the saddle, his mechanical movements betraying a growing tension. When their gazes met, she read a deep worry in his eyes that he tried to hide. "Be careful," he murmured, checking the straps. "And if something goes wrong, everything will be fine." Belle interrupted him, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's my mother, Tomas. I thought she was dead for years." They rode north, under a merciless sun that turned the horizon into a shimmering mirage. Dolores led the way at a steady pace, rarely stopping to let the horses rest. She spoke little, answering Belle's questions with short, evasive phrases. "Where were you all this time?" Belle asked as they crossed a dry wash. "Here and there, looking for work, a way to survive, and looking for you." "Why didn't you ever come back home?" Dolores avoided her gaze. "There was nothing left there for me after your father left." At dusk, they reached a dilapidated cabin nestled among red rocks. The structure leaned dangerously to one side, and the windowless frames were boarded up. The place looked abandoned for years. "Is this where we're going to live?" Belle asked, her heart sinking. "Temporarily," Dolores replied, dismounting. "Just until things quiet down." Inside, the cabin was even more dismal. Two moldy straw pallets lay on the dirt floor, and a musty smell caught in her throat. Dolores lit a candle, revealing cobwebs in the corners and traces of rodents. That night, Belle slept poorly. The pallet was damp and uncomfortable, but what troubled her more was her mother's strange behavior. Dolores jumped at every sound, constantly looked toward the door, and rummaged incessantly in a bag she kept near her. In the morning, Belle woke with a terrible headache and nausea. Her vision was blurry, and her hands trembled uncontrollably. "What's happening to me?" she moaned. Trying to get up, Dolores approached with a steaming mug. "You're tired, mija. Drink this, you'll feel better." But when Belle brought the mug to her lips, the pungent smell emanating from it made her stomach churn. She gave up on drinking and watched her mother more closely. For the first time, she noticed the nervousness in her movements, the way she avoided her gaze, and especially traces of green powder on her fingers. Herbs, the same herbs saloon girls used to drug unruly customers. "You're not my mother," Belle said in a weak but determined voice. Dolores froze, the mug still in her hands. Her mask of maternal tenderness slipped, revealing a hard, calculating face. "Of course I am, you idiot. Who else? My mother had a scar on her left hand, a branding iron burn." Belle fought against the dizziness that assailed her, and she never spoke Spanish at home. Papa hated it. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken threats. Outside, the wind rattled the ill-fitting planks of the cabin. "How much is Harlan paying you?" Belle asked. Dolores dropped the pretense completely. Her smile turned nasty, almost predatory. "Enough to live comfortably for years. You're worth more than you think, little girl." She pulled a revolver from her bag and pointed it at Belle. "Now you'll drink this tea nicely and we'll wait for Harlan to come get you. He'll be here before sundown." But Belle, despite her state, had noticed one thing Dolores had overlooked. The cabin door had remained ajar, and a familiar snout poked through the opening. Valiente had followed their trail. With a desperate gesture, Belle flung the mug at Dolores and lunged for the door. The dog barked furiously at the sight of the weapon, distracting the fake mother long enough for Belle to stumble out. "Valiente, go get Tomas." She didn't know if the dog would understand, but Valiente seemed to grasp the urgency of the situation. He shot like an arrow to the south, kicking up a cloud of red dust. Dolores burst out of the cabin, screaming curses, but Belle had already reached the rocks. Despite her weakness, she scrambled as best she could, looking for a place to hide. She found a crevice between two redstone blocks and squeezed in, gasping. The poison, because it was indeed poison, blurred her vision and slowed her movements, but fear still gave her enough strength to resist. In the distance, she heard Dolores rummaging through the bushes, calling her name in a falsely sweet voice. "Isabel, my dear, come out. You're sick, you need help." Then, when Dolores couldn't find her, the tone changed. "Come out, you little bitch. You can't get far in your condition." The sun began its descent towards the horizon, painting the rocks with coppery hues. Belle closed her eyes and clutched Elena's brooch to her heart. "Elena," she whispered, "if your husband hears me, help him find me." And in the desert silence, she heard in the distance the pounding of hooves drawing closer. It was Tomas. Belle recognized his silhouette even before he dismounted. He was accompanied by Valiente, who barked towards the rocks, guiding his master to Belle's hiding place. "Belle!" Tomas shouted, his voice carrying in the dry twilight air. She wanted to answer, but her throat was too constricted by the effects of the poison. She could only emit a weak moan that was still enough to alert Tomas. He climbed towards her with the agility of a man used to rough terrain. When he found her, curled up between the stones, pale and trembling, a cold rage seized him. He gently scooped her into his arms and carried her to his horse. "What did she give you?" he asked, settling her in the saddle in front of him. "Herbs. In the tea," Belle murmured against his shoulder. Dolores emerged from the bushes, still armed, but she stopped dead in her tracks at the sight of Tomas. He had his own revolver in his hand, and his gaze left no room for negotiation. "Drop that weapon," he ordered in an icy voice. "She belongs to me," Dolores protested. "Harlan McRae paid me to—" "Harlan McRae isn't paying anyone anymore." Tomas's statement was heavy with unspoken meaning. Dolores paled and dropped her weapon. The ride back was a nightmare for Belle. The poison made her drift between consciousness and fainting, but she felt the reassuring warmth of Tomas against her back and heard his voice whispering soothing words in Spanish. They reached the ranch in the dead of night. Tomas carried Belle to her room and gently laid her down. He made her drink salt water to help her vomit what remained of the poison, then prepared a herbal tea of his own concoction to cleanse her system. "What happened with Harlan?" she asked faintly when she could finally speak. "He came to the ranch this afternoon with 6 men. They found the house empty." Tomas sat on the chair near the bed. "They ransacked the place, killed 2 chickens, broke some furniture. Then they wrote words on the walls. Belle closed her eyes, imagining the destruction. Property. Thief. Give her back. Thomas enumerated in a neutral voice. They thought they'd scare you by destroying your home. And you? Me, I'm just plain angry. He stood and walked to the window. Valiente ran for hours to guide me to you. That animal loves you, Belle. Just like Tormenta loves you. Just like this land accepts you. He turned back to her, and in his brown eyes she read fierce determination. Tomorrow we'll rebuild. And if Harlan comes back, he'll find something other than an empty house and a lone woman. That night, despite her weakness, Belle slept soundly. For the first time in a long time, she dreamed of desert flowers blooming after a storm, their roots drawing rare water to transform sand into a garden. The next morning, Belle discovered the extent of the damage. Windows were shattered, furniture overturned, and cruel words blackened the adobe walls like scars. But instead of the dismay she would have felt weeks earlier, a new flame burned within her. "We're going to clean everything up," she said to Tomas, who was picking up broken dishes. "We? This home took me in. These walls protected me. Now it's my turn to mend them." They worked side by side all morning, wiping away the insults, fixing what they could. Valiente accompanied them, sometimes dragging a stick in his jaws as if he wanted to help too. Around noon, a figure appeared on the path. Belle tensed, but Tomas placed a soothing hand on her shoulder. "It's Senora Martinez, the village schoolmistress." The old woman approached shyly, carrying a basket covered with a white cloth. Her face was weathered by the sun, but her eyes were gentle and intelligent. "I brought some food," she said simply, "and some news." She sat in the shade of the porch and uncovered her basket. Fresh tortillas, stewed beans, dried fruit. "Harlan McCrae left the area this morning," she announced. "With his men. He won't be coming back." "How do you know?" Tomas asked. "Because last night, after he ransacked your home, he went to the saloon and boasted about what he'd done." Senora Martinez smiled with obvious satisfaction. But he chose the wrong audience. No one appreciated a stranger coming to destroy an honest man's property. She turned to Belle. "And besides, little one, you have more friends than you think. That child who's always drawing, Maria, she showed everyone a portrait she'd done of you. She said, 'Look how pretty she is now. Look how she smiles.'" The afternoon brought more visitors. Don Rodriguez, the nearest neighbor, came with wood and nails. His wife brought new curtains to replace the torn ones. Even Father Miguel, the old priest, stopped by to bless the house, to chase away evil spirits. By sundown, the ranch had regained a welcoming air. Better yet, it had gained something it never had before, a true sense of belonging to the community. That evening, Belle went alone to Elena's grave. She placed fresh flowers and stroked the brooch pinned to her dress. "Thank you," she whispered. "You taught me that you can be seen even when you think no one's looking. Now, I know I'm not invisible anymore." In the twilight silence, she thought she heard a whisper in the wind, like a blessing carried on the warm desert air. 3 months later, Tomas's ranch had taken on the feel of a real home. Wildflowers grew near the porch, carefully watered by Belle every morning. Valiente now slept in the shade of the porch, and Tormenta would sometimes rest his massive head against the young woman's shoulder when she brushed the other horses. One morning, Harlan McCrae returned. Alone this time, without weapons, without threats. He dismounted in the yard and waited, hat in hand, for Belle to come out of the house. She appeared in the doorway, dressed in a blue dress she had sewn herself, Elena's brooch shining in the sun on her bodice. Her hair, which she now wore down, flowed freely in the morning breeze. "Isabel," Harlan said in a different voice, stripped of his usual arrogance. My name is Belle," she interrupted him calmly. Isabel was the name of a broken girl. "I'm not that girl anymore." Harlan nodded painfully. "Belle, then. I came to give you something back." He pulled a tarnished silver coin from his pocket, which he placed in the dust at her feet. "It's one of the 15 pieces that man paid for you. The only one I have left. I lost everything, you know. My land, my men, my reputation. All of it for a revenge that wasn't worth it." Belle picked up the coin and clutched it in her palm. It was warm, heated by the desert sun. "You know what I'm going to do with it?" she asked. Harlan shook his head. Belle walked over to an iron brazier Tomas used for branding cattle. She built a fire with kindling and waited for the flames to rise clear and bright. Then she tossed the coin into it. "There's the price of my shame," she said, watching the metal deform in the flames. "Today, it's nothing but ash and smoke." Behind her, she heard Tomas's footsteps as he came out of the stable, but she didn't turn around. She kept staring at the fire, hypnotized by this symbolic destruction of her past. "Leave now," she said to Harlan, "and don't ever come back." He remounted without a word and rode off in a cloud of red dust. Belle watched him disappear on the horizon, then turned to Tomas, who was watching her with pride. "It's over," she said simply. That evening, little Maria from the village came to the ranch with her mother. She handed Belle a drawing she had made. Belle smiling, surrounded by desert flowers, with Valiente at her feet and Tormenta in the background. At the bottom of the drawing, the child had written in her neat handwriting, "You look like someone strong now." Belle pinned the drawing on the kitchen wall, right next to Elena's portrait. Two women, two eras, but the same serene smile of those who have found their place in the world. Did this story touch you? We'd be honored to have you among our subscribers to discover more tales of hope and transformation. Don't hesitate to like this video and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Your support encourages us to continue sharing these moments of humanity that remind us that even in the most arid deserts, the most beautiful flowers can bloom. Belle finally belonged somewhere. She had gained more than a home or a family. She had reclaimed her own self-respect, her dignity, her place among the living. And like the desert flowers whose emblem she wore, she had bloomed where no one would have believed beauty could be born.